Welcome back. Okay, this is our last half hour, so let's get started. Let's not waste any more time on anything except English. Okay, are you ready? Question: did Carl Lewis win the 100 meters or the 1,000 meters in the Olympics? Do you remember Carl Lewis? Carl Lewis, decís aquí. Jerry Lewis, but the name is Lewis. Lewis. In fact, the name Luis in English, Lewis, y Lewis, como Jerry Lewis, is pronounced the same, Lewis. Carl Lewis won the 100 meters and the 200 meters in the Olympics in 1984 and in 1988, and he also won the long jump. He was considered the world's fastest human. He was very fast, the 100 meters. Yes, Carl Lewis. And he won his events every time except once. In 1988, in Seoul, Korea, the capital of Korea, here you say Seoul. In English we say Seoul, the capital of Korea. And he didn't win. The Canadian of Jamaican descent, Ben Johnson, won. But within an hour after the race, he was disqualified for using drugs. Okay, so Carl Lewis was awarded the gold medal in 1988. So he won in 2 consecutive Olympics. And then in 1992, he didn't win, but I think he won the long jump. The long jump. All right, so question: did the Indians steal horses from the cowboys, or did they steal whiskey from the cowboys? Well, in the Old West, the Indians stole horses. Yes, usually when the Indians attacked the cowboys, they were not interested in killing the cowboys necessarily. They were interested in the horses. The history of horses in the New World is very interesting. When Christopher Columbus reached the New World, Indians had never seen horses. Horses are originally from Asia, from the Russian steppe or from Mongolia. And the horses didn't reach the New World until Christopher Columbus took horses to the New World. If you remember, when Hernán Cortés invaded Mexico, the Indians were surprised by the horses. In fact, at the beginning, they thought the horses and the Spanish soldiers were the same animal, with 2 different heads. So horses arrived with the arrival of the Europeans. And of course, the Indians didn't have horses. But when the Spaniards took horses across the Atlantic to the New World, some horses became stray or were stolen by Indians, and very quickly, in a question of 100 or 200 years, the Indians in what is today the United States were using horses, what we usually call the Plains Indians. And instead of hunting buffalo out on the Great Plains, las grandes llanuras americanas, instead of hunting buffalo on foot, they hunted buffalo on horses, and they became very good, very, very good horsemen, riders, jinetes, the Indians. And so when the Anglo-Saxon whites, not the Spaniards, reached the New World 1 century later and began to penetrate into the continent, they found Indians with horses. And those horses had gone up from Mexico into what is today the central area of the United States. Then Indians, the way they got horses were 2 ways: by breeding the horses, cruzando los caballos, propagando, and by stealing them. One time my great-grandfather was almost killed by a band of Comanches. My great-grandfather lived in Texas. He was born there in 1842, and it's probably about 1875, he and a friend of his were out on their horses gathering or checking things, and they were not on their horses. They were walking. Their horses were near them, and in the distance, there was a small band of Comanches that were coming. So my great-grandfather, bisabuelo, my great-grandfather and his friend turned and started running to their horses and jumped onto their horses. His friend jumped onto his horse and rode away to ride. He rode away, se alejó, montado a caballo. And my great-grandfather jumped, and he had a problem and fell to the ground, and the horse was scared, espantado, and ran away. So my great-grandfather was alone in front of the Indians. And he went behind a fallen tree, took out his revolver, and was ready to defend himself against perhaps 8 or 10 Comanches. But the Comanches ignored him completely. They didn't pay any attention to him. They passed my great-grandfather and continued chasing the other man and the horse. They were not interested in my great-grandfather. They didn't care if he lived or died. That small band of Comanches only wanted the horse, or the horses. And so they continued. And they caught the horse, my great-grandfather's horse, and they continued, and they shot 11 arrows in the back of my great-grandfather's friend. He fell from the horse. The Indians got the horse and went away. About 30 minutes later, my great-grandfather found his friend, who was still alive, with 11 arrows in his back. He took the arrows out, each one by one, because they were not very deep, and he carried his friend to the village. And the friend survived. It took him a year to recover from the wounds, las heridas. So, moral of the story, if you're out in the country, in the United States, and a group of Indians come, give them your horse, because they're probably not interested in you. Only in the horses. Yeah, there were a lot of stray horses, caballos sin dueño. There were a lot of stray horses in the United States at that time. Okay, next question. Did the sun rise before or after you left home this morning? When I left home this morning, it was still dark. Yes, I left home this morning at 7 o'clock, very early. And so logically, when I left home, it was still dark. And when I got to work at 7:20 really, it was still dark. When I bought a newspaper at 7:25, it was still dark. When I sat down in my office at 7:30, it was still dark. When I left my office at 8:30, quite early, to come here to start recording programs, it was just starting to get light. It wasn't still dark. Now, when you left home this morning, was it still dark? That's something in Spain that I don't like. There are a lot of things about Spain I like, but one is the timetable, the sun. Spain is 2 hours ahead of the sun half the year, and 1 hour ahead of the sun the other half. Spain is on the same time as Italy, Germany, Denmark, and for me that doesn't make sense. But because Spanish people like sunlight so much, they prefer to go to work in the morning, in the dark, in order to enjoy more sunlight later in the day. And it's strange. For me, it's a strange sensation, especially in the summer or in the late spring, early summer, when the sun sets at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, very, very late. It really doesn't get dark in June and early July until about 10:30. And it gives me a strange sensation. Sometimes I'm working in my office and it's still light outside. It's like normal in the middle of the day, and I'm working and I look at the clock, it's 8 o'clock in the evening, you see. So I don't think it's very natural to do it that way. Next question, did the English break diplomatic relations with Germany or with Mexico at the beginning of the Second World War? Well, at the beginning of the Second World War, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, broke diplomatic relations with Germany in 1939. When Germany crossed the border into Poland and invaded Poland. And that activated the beginning, that started the Second World War, because Great Britain and Poland had a treaty of mutual defense in case they were attacked by a third party. And so when Germany crossed the border, the United Kingdom or Great Britain was obligated to honor the treaty, respetar el tratado. To honrar decimos en inglés, to honor the treaty, and they declared war on Germany. Germany very quickly conquered most of Poland, and Poland was more or less divided between the Soviet Union and Germany. And then Great Britain tried to invade Europe at Dunkirk, but they were thrown back into the English Channel. And they had to wait until 1944, D-Day, with the invasion of Normandy, before Great Britain could cross the English Channel again. Next question. When you were 2 years old, did you grow quickly or slowly? Well, it depends. Some people grow very quickly at certain times, and other times they seem stable. When you're 2 years old, you're not going to believe me now, but when you're 2 years old, you are half your adult height. For example, if you have children, if you have a child that's 2 years old, measure the child, because probably that is 50% of the final adult height. My parents measured me, and it was correct. They measured me, and I was 3 feet tall. 3 feet, 3 pies, 3 feet, which is about 1 meter, or no, less, about 90 centimeters, and I'm 1 meter 80. So when a child is only 2 years old, the child is half his or her full adult height. Next question. Now, did Napoleon normally tell his army to advance or to retreat? Well, because Napoleon won most of his battles, he usually told his army to advance, not to retreat. But a good general, yes, a good general, will use retreat strategically or tactically to win his battles. So at certain times, I'm sure Napoleon used the idea of retreat and not always advance. Napoleon won every battle he was involved in until one. What was the first battle that Napoleon lost? Do you know? Luis, do you know? What's the first battle Napoleon lost? The Battle of Bailén here in Spain. That was the first time. In 1808 was the first time our friend Napoleon Bonaparte lost a battle. And really, the invasion of Spain was the first step in the fall of Napoleon. He shouldn't have invaded Spain. In fact, he didn't want to invade Spain. It wasn't his idea initially. He wanted to invade Portugal because he was angry with Portugal, because he wanted to create a fortress Europe, Fortaleza Europa, similar to Hitler a century and 20 years later. Napoleon wanted to blockade every harbor, every port in Europe to deny British goods, because Great Britain was trading with Russia, with Portugal, with many countries in Europe, and Napoleon's prime objective was to defeat the British. And his first step, or one of the most important steps, was to deny Britain access to European markets, to deny, negar el acceso, to deny access for British goods. British goods. Good is bueno. Añades un S, son mercancías o géneros. Goods and services, bienes y servicios. An economy is based on activities of buying and selling goods and services. Okay. The exchange of goods and services constitutes an economic system, or a market system, basically, based on a capitalistic economy. Okay, but goods also means mercancías. And Great Britain, in the late 18th century and early 19th century, needed its trade with Europe. And Napoleon tried to deny that, blockading ports and closing, in essence, closing Europe to British goods. But it was very difficult. And one of the biggest culprits was Portugal. And so Napoleon Bonaparte decided to castigate or to punish Portugal. But in order to do that, he needed to cross through Spain, because this was after 1804 and 1805. Because before that, France had a good navy. After Trafalgar, or Trafalgar, as you say in Spanish, he lost most of his navy and he lost control of the seas. So he couldn't castigate or punish Portugal from the sea. He had to punish Portugal from the land. But in order to do that, he had to cross Spain. And Spain was not an enemy. Spain basically was an ally. There was not too much animosity between Napoleon and Charles IV of Spain, the famous king that we see in Goya's paintings. But problems started when the French troops began to enter Spain, and suddenly Spain became a target for Napoleon, and he decided to put his brother in charge of the country, and the Spanish people called him Pepe Botella, and the famous 2 de Mayo, and you know the story as well, or maybe better than me. But the idea of guerrillas, Guerra de Guerrillas, was started in Spain. It had existed since the beginning of time, but the formalization and giving it a specific name was based on how Spain defended itself against the French troops, the Napoleonic troops. And our friend Napoleon had constant headaches in Spain, quebraderos de cabeza de verdad in Spain, with the Spanish armies, the formal army, the regular army, and the guerrilla. Guerrilla, curiosamente, en inglés se dice igual, se escribe igual, guerrilla, doble L al final y doble R en medio, pero se pronuncia guerrilla, se pronuncia igual que gorila. Guerrilla warfare is la guerra de guerrillas, guerrilla warfare. And the French troops didn't know how to fight that. They had a lot of problems. And then on top of that, they lost in Bailén, and they lost the Battle of Zaragoza, our famous Agustina de Aragon, you remember. And then they lost, I think, in Navarre. They were losing everywhere. And finally, Napoleon decided to divert his attention to Russia and to punish Russia as well, because Russia was importing goods, vuelvo a mercancías. Russia was importing goods from Great Britain, the perfidious Albion, yes. And so Napoleon was very upset. And so he decided to cross Europe with 100,000 men and to invade Russia. And he invaded successfully at the beginning. He had to cross 1,000 kilometers of Russia. That's like crossing Spain in a half. And he reached Moscow. And he entered Moscow with his army. Los americanos decimos Moscow. Los británicos dicen Moscow. Yo cuando enseño digo Moscow. I don't know why. But in any case, the French reached Moscow and took over Moscow. No problem, because 90% of the population had abandoned the city. He found an empty city, Moscow. And then certain arsonists, Russian arsonists, began to burn the city. Suddenly one night, in 20 or 30 different places in Moscow, houses began to burn. Poor houses and beautiful houses and mansions. And Napoleon didn't know what to do. They were destroying the city. Arsonists. Arson, an arsonist. Arson is when you set fire on purpose. Deliberate starting of fires is arson. And an arsonist is a person who starts a fire. Prender fuego. En inglés decimos to start, como empezar. To start a fire, Luis. And in Moscow, Napoleon didn't know what to do. Moscow was burning. Practically all of it. The Moscow you see today is post-1812. It's after 1812. Practically nothing remains except the Kremlin itself, where Napoleon had his troops, was stationed, and he protected the Kremlin. But the rest of the city burned. And so he finally decided to turn around and leave. He didn't have an enemy. And as he left and slowly retreated, then the Russian army appeared and punished the French army in their retreat in the middle of the winter. Late fall, late autumn, and into the winter. And of the 100,000 French troops, more than 70,000 died. It's a very sad story for the French. And then Napoleon went back to Paris, and very soon he was on the island of Elbe, off the coast of Elba, you say in Spanish, off the coast of Italy. He stayed there for less than a year, and then he went back to France, clandestinely. But on his march from the Mediterranean coast to Paris, he united the country again. Very special man, Napoleon. Very interesting. I don't understand the man, and I don't understand the French for following him. But nevertheless, he reunited the country, and then decided finally to face the British at Waterloo in Belgium, and it was his last battle he lost again, and the most important. He almost won that battle. He almost won it. Okay? That's one of 20 different stories perhaps I can tell you about our friend Napoleon, a very short little man who had a very strong impact on European history. Next question. Did Cervantes write Don Quixote or Moby Dick? En inglés se dice Don Quixote. Se escribe con X. In fact, the first time English-speaking people in school, perhaps in secondary school, we see this book, nobody says Don Quixote. Everybody says Don Quixote. And we think his first name is Don. Like Don Donald Duck, we think his first name is Don, and his last name is Quixote. And then the teacher says, no, it's Don Quixote. Don Quixote. Now, Miguel de Cervantes y Saavedra. Miguel Cervantes. Did he write Don Quixote or Moby Dick? Well, everybody knows he wrote Don Quixote. When did he write it? 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 Did he? Did he? Los nativos solemos decir did he. Like do a diddy diddy dum diddy do. When did he write it? He wrote it on two different moments. Around 1604, the first part, the first book. And the second book, I think around 1613, 9 or 10 years later, he wrote it. Which book do you prefer? Most people prefer the first book because they're more adventures. But really the second book has more philosophy. And Cervantes was 9 or 10 years older when he wrote it. Okay? Yes. The Adventures of Don Quixote. Okay, let's switch, Luis. And who wrote Moby Dick? A man by the name, un hombre, un señor, de nombre, a man by the name of Herman Melville. Herman Melville, he had worked as a whaler for a while. He worked on a whaling ship, Herman Melville, but not for very long. And that's a long book, a very interesting book about a man by the name of Captain Ahab, who had an obsession. He wanted to capture and kill a white whale, which would be an albino whale, because whales are not white. But probably like among people and certain animals, albinos exist. And so this was a white whale. And Captain Ahab had had an encounter with a white whale once before and had almost died. He had lost one of his legs. So he had a wooden leg. And he swore revenge, jurar venganza. He swore. El verbo is to swear. And to swear has two meanings, or three really. Jurar fidelidad, to swear allegiance. So it has a good sense in this way. To swear is decir tacos, to swear. Y luego, jurar con intensidad. En este caso, venganza, jurar venganza. And our friend, swear, swore, sworn. And our friend, Captain Ahab, he swore revenge on Moby Dick, that white whale. And he gathered a crew, una tripulación, a crew of sailors, whalers, balleneros, and he went after that. He wanted to get that white whale, Luis. And he found it. He found it. And the whale won again. Captain Ahab died. Everybody on the ship died except one man. And that's the man who told the story of Moby Dick to Herman Melville. And the symbolism in the book is very special. The white whale, symbolic. It's a very interesting book if you want to read it. I read it in one day, 16 hours in bed reading the book. And I'll tell you about it another day, about the story, page by page or chapter by chapter. But I don't have time now because I have to go. I have to say goodbye. It's been a pleasure once again. The class is over, which means I'm leaving. I'm out of here, okay? But between now and the class tomorrow, please sit down for a few minutes, think about English, study, do something concerning the language because I need your help. With your help, we can achieve a lot together. Thank you very much.